Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining today's webinar. My name is Melissa Stept, and I'm the Marcom Manager here at CardioLog Analytics, and I'm joined today by SharePoint expert, Jill Hannemann. I'll go ahead and kick things off. Today's webinar is part one of our team's webinar series with Jill, and today's webinar is about creating a roadmap for your team's rollout. A bit of housekeeping. This webinar is being recorded. If you want to share this with a colleague, we'll go ahead and send an email with the recording after today's session. And of course, if you have any questions, please send them through the questions box within the GoToWebinar panel. We'll leave some time towards the end for a Q&A. You can also connect with us on Twitter with the Twitter handle @CardioLog. In regards to the agenda for today's webinar, we'll start out with a very short introduction. I'll talk a bit about CardioLog Analytics and who we are. Then Jill will go ahead and explain how you can create an effective roadmap for rolling out Microsoft Teams. I'll then go into a quick demo of CardioLog Analytics and CardioLog Engage to show you how analytics and advanced internal communication can help you boost adoption in SharePoint, Office 365, and Microsoft Teams. And at the end, we'll be doing a Q&A. So again, please feel free to send your questions throughout the course of the presentation. So I'll start off with a brief introduction. CardioLog Analytics has been around for about 14 years now, since 2005, and we're based out of Boston. Over the past 14 years, we've been focused on web analytics designed for SharePoint and now Office 365 and Teams. Our flagship solution is CardioLog Analytics, and it's built specifically for internal platforms, including all versions of SharePoint up to 2019, as well as SharePoint Online and Office 365. We can also track third-party tools like Yammer, Teams, and CRM tools. And our solution is available both on-prem and as a SaaS version based on Power BI. So now I'll go ahead and hand things over to Jill.
Thanks, Melissa. So I am a consultant with Avanade, and I come from our advisory group focusing on workplace experience. My background is with SharePoint. So I started working with SharePoint with Moss 2007, have a previous history with other CMS and portal platforms, but have always come at the technology with a knowledge management, sort of a BA lens, if you will. And so I've always been really interested and have worked with companies on focusing on the softer side. So understanding how to manage information, unstructured content, classify content, and make sure that it's reusable and findable and organized to ensure that you are retaining that valuable knowledge that your people are creating every single day. And so I get really excited about all the things that have been happening with Office 365 and now so Teams, just because it's really taken, watching the evolution of these team sites and these collaboration spaces come to the fruition of Teams has been a really exciting journey. That's not to say that everything is perfect, but what we have today with Teams is very usable. It's very easy to adopt, and just with a little governance and a little thought behind it, you are going to be up and running with Teams in no time. So before we jump into the conversation, I just want to mention really quickly about my company, my sponsor for this call, Avanade. We are an industry leader in Microsoft deployments and technologies. So we have done over 10,000 plus projects around SharePoint and Office 365 and Microsoft technologies. We were named a leader in the worldwide Microsoft implementation services by IDC MarketScape. We also have about 18,000 professionals around the world. So I wanted to kind of kick off the call by sharing this article that I read. So this came out on July 11th from Business Insider, and the headline was striking: 13 million daily active users on Teams. So Teams chat app is now growing faster than Slack. So this is notable in a couple of ways. This is the first time that Microsoft has ever published user consumption statistics. It has talked about how many companies worldwide are adopting Teams, but it's never gone down to the user level to discuss what the trend has been for consumption. And I think that that's really interesting to note. So I believe when you get kind of into the nitty gritty, you know, it's not a direct comparable to Slack, but it's a little bit of a dig, and it also is really demonstrating the market share that Teams is now consuming. And I find this to hold true in my experience as a consultant and working with a lot of different companies. So I'm having more and more conversations about Teams and where they are in the roadmap and challenges organizations are having with Teams. And so one of the reasons why I found this topic to be really timely is because more often than not, I'm actually having conversations with companies around what their roadmap should be, and so it's different for every organization where they're looking to go with Teams, where they're looking to go with Office 365. There are a lot of organizations that are that have been on Office 365 now for, you know, maybe even 5 years at this point, but are still dabbling in Teams and trying to figure out what's the best way to roll it out, what's the best way to leverage this technology that we may have other comparables in our stack, and how do we reconcile that, and what's our plan to either make that switch or to not make the switch and to ignore Teams. So every organization is very different, and I think it's a really interesting conversation. But what I wanted to put together for this call was to just give you kind of a high level overview of a roadmap and some considerations, and to also just share with you some of the experiences and conversations and concerns that I'm having, I'm hearing from other folks in the industry and how they're using Teams. So we are going to, so this is kind of like a checklist. These are the things that, you know, if you are looking at what are my high level items that I need to tackle in order to roll out Teams. So we can consider this our agenda. It can be a checklist for you later on, but these are just the things that I ask my customers when I'm talking to them about how they're going to roll out Teams. So first and foremost, governance. How and why are you going to be leveraging Teams? And how does it fit within your overall IT stack? Have you introduced groups, Office 365 groups, to your users? Are you using Slack? Are some folks using Slack? Are you heavily embedded in team sites? Are you rolling out a new round of team sites? Have your users used any type of online productivity solution before? So there's a lot of different variations that I hear about, and you're going to hear me refer to Microsoft quite a bit, but Microsoft is doing a really phenomenal job on their material that they're preparing because they want to get their customers on Teams. So there are there's a lot of material out there, I'm going to just say. And so I'm going to refer to a couple of things as we talk, go through this conversation, but one of the pieces that they talk about as far as guidance in adoption is basic adoption versus deeper adoption. So basic adoption from Microsoft's standpoint is a company that might be 100 people, 100 users or less. So basically they're saying, you know, you can just start using it. and let it evolve organically. You're small enough that people are probably talking to one another, and you don't have so many users that it could be potentially detrimental. So they're pretty much saying, go ahead, open the doors, start using it, turn it on, let people have it. For the most part, I can't necessarily disagree with that. Obviously, I think IT and management need to have some thoughts around any security or any other higher level, governance thoughts around the operations of teams. So security, whether or not you're going to let in external users, et cetera. But there really isn't a whole lot to detriment to opening it up to letting your users just experiment. And that's really the thing with teams. It's easy to learn, it's easy to pick up, and experimentation is really the key to figuring out how to make teams work best for your organization. Deeper adoption is for any larger organization, and that's really where I'm going to be spending a good amount of my thoughts around, because I am talking with a good number of large companies that are 5,000 users and more about how best to roll out teams to their user base when they are trying to change almost change the culture of collaboration to a certain extent. And that's really the core of the conversation, that you are really looking at trying to change the culture of collaboration and how technology fits into that equation. So administration, there are definitely some settings and decisions that need to be made, and that supports your governance and how your company will use teams. Operations, I actually have a good number of conversations around this as well. So with Office 365 and now the introduction of Teams, the conversation really is, what do I need? How many resources do I need within IT in order to support my users and support the operations and administration of this tool? There isn't any right or wrong answer, and there's a lot of different ways I've seen IT teams organized in order to support teams, but it is a cloud-based SaaS solution. And so, the typical model of supporting an on-premises solution is no longer relevant in this conversation. The roles change, and the skill sets of the people within IT are different, so to a certain extent. And then I also like to point out help desk and making sure that help desk is coming along for the ride, because oftentimes in the conversations that I am a part of with regard to how to roll out teams, help desk is forgotten, and the training that those folks need in order to continue to be able to support the user base is just critically important. So then we get into end user rollout, and this is really where I'm going to spend a bulk of the conversation, because that's really where rubber is going to hit the road. So where do we begin? Ultimately, I like to think that these technology changes need to fit within your overall IT roadmap, and it could be that this is a major part of your IT roadmap of where you're looking to go. But I will talk with organizations that have some major challenges and major priorities around their IT roadmap that are really critical to the trajectory of where the business is looking to go in the next 3 to 5 years. And oftentimes those are the priorities that take precedence. Sometimes Teams is really a part of that, because there is a lot of ROI tied to Teams and what employee experience and what productivity can mean to improving internal communication, improving collaboration, and improving the way you service your customers and your time to market, your overall speed to market. So ultimately, Teams needs to fit within that roadmap, and it needs to be a line item within that roadmap. And you are also looking at the way to introduce these changes with the least amount of disruption to everyday business. And what not to do in this scenario, right, is to make it a part of your IT roadmap, but to just think that, well, we're just going to give it to the users and they're going to just start using it, and not giving a whole lot of thought to the end user rollout and the change management involved, because ultimately there will be disruption, there will be delays, there will be confusion. So this is kind of how I look at the way when you're rolling out teams. These are sort of the core, the four core pillars, if you will, of the areas that you need to be considering. And obviously they all do touch on one another quite extensively, but for this conversation, I'm going to focus a little bit more on governance and also end user rollout in talking about how to roll it out, and some advice I can provide in this regard. So going back to where you begin and what your approach to the rollout could be, and I'm touching on this just because there's no wrong or right way to do this, and it really is dependent on that IT roadmap and all the different core services that Teams provides. So because Teams is going to become, is the replacement for Skype for Business, so Skype for Business will eventually have an end of life with a transition into Teams, and every single day, Teams is gaining even more capability and parity to the Skype for Business platform. So in the context of conference calls, meetings, telephony, what we're finding is, there's definitely a different roadmap to roll out for meetings and telephony, and also determining organizationally what solutions you're going to be offering to your users, and how and what makes sense to your users, and what investments you've already made. So I've seen a number of different configurations with this, where the telephony solution will remain the same. There is a heavy emphasis or reliance and trust, and core contract already established with WebEx, and WebEx is not going to go away for teleconferencing and for conference calls and for web collaboration, web meetings. So in which case, they aren't, some of these organizations that I work with are not even looking at Teams to leverage it for meetings and or telephony. On the other hand, this is part of the roadmap. Some organizations are completely bought into the Microsoft ecosystem and are looking to migrate eventually completely to meetings and telephony within the Teams framework. So a good number of companies that I do work with are on Skype for Business, and what they're doing is that they're going to islands mode and they're living with both for the time being. So Skype for Business has not completely gone away. They're still maintaining it for telephony, but they are enabling meetings and chat, and so there is the islands mode for having both work independent of one another, but they're both turned on. So this is one way that you can roll it out. You can say, here's our timeline, and it has to be deliberate, that this is our roadmap for meetings and telephony. On the other hand, Teams has this, kind of like TeamSite, this SharePoint TeamSite sort of parity, and that's and this collaboration component that that is very different from the governance and the roadmap approach to rollout for meetings and telephony. So there's nothing really to say that you can't go ahead and roll out the Teams and channels collaboration aspect of Teams while you are figuring out, while you are readying your approach to meetings and telephony. And or vice versa. You can roll out meetings and telephony first, and turn off the Teams and channels aspect, and then bring Teams and channels to your users when you're ready. So, but either way, it's going to really depend on where what are your dependencies? What are your users using today? What kind of disruption are you looking at? And whether or not you even think that the Teams and Channels collaboration solution is going to meet the needs of your users, or if there is a shortcoming with the tool that you can't, that is a hard requirement for your organization that you are waiting for Microsoft to catch up before you're ready to move forward. So I'm just trying to let you know that there's no wrong or right answer, and it's something to weigh the pros and cons and take a look at your own individual environment to understand what's going to work best for you. So core roadmap milestones. Microsoft has its own version of this, and I'm going to say that there is a really, really awesome flip chart, which is you can find in some of the Teams online resources from Microsoft. And it's this really gorgeous Adobe kind of, animated flip book that provides you with a lot of adoption material, and they have their own roadmap and milestones for rollout of Teams. And mine is somewhat similar, but I'd like to just point out a couple of other things that I think are really important. So I highlight executive sponsorship in this, and the reason why is in working with a number of different organizations and even hearing from companies that have rolled out Teams and have done so successfully, the key differentiator that I have noticed with these companies is that they always had the top-down buy-in. The top leadership at the top said, this is what we are going to use. This is the tool that is going to help us, get to our next goal, help us meet our strategic agenda. And they're the ones who are pushing this down. So when you don't have that buy-in and when you don't have that stake in the ground, it's really an uphill battle for IT and even line of business to make that happen. So I really stress that having very open transparency with your executive leadership to gain that sponsorship and to gain their belief in the difference that Teams is going to make for your organization is really, really critical. So, going through, determining your IT roadmap, configuring, testing, a lot of this has to happen in the background. A lot of this has to happen before you even get to your experimenting and defining your what and your why statements for your communication material. But then, getting into experimentation, again, I like to say Teams really doesn't need a whole lot of training. It's fairly intuitive in how to use, and we've seen, quite possibly like the easiest pickup of any of these, SharePoint, productivity type platforms or Microsoft. And so I say this in jest just because I am a legacy SharePoint user and I've gone through the pain. But Teams is very easy to adopt and learn, although it is a paradigm shift for many. And so depending on the culture of your organization, it could be challenging. So, I don't want to say that it's a walk in the park, but the challenges are different than what they used to be. And for scaling, then considering how are you planning on leveraging Teams? How are you planning on structuring the information architecture for Teams? And this is definitely a shift for a lot of organizations. Teams is flat now. It's a very flat architecture. And while you do want to put a little forethought into planning, you also want to leave a lot of room for ad hoc and to leave some room for variables that you haven't necessarily considered that users may have in their need for a team or a channel. So putting some light IA thought behind your rollout is important. And it's also important to adjust your mindset to the fact that it is a flatter structure with a flatter permission structure. So I have a lot to say about all these things, and I am starting to run short of time. So I do want to highlight, here's a sample roadmap for Teams. And this is something that we do for customers. This is just a sample for, an organization that would be, maybe greater than 5,000 users. So more typically for a larger company. But here are a couple steps and a couple swim lanes that are IT focused. Consider the rollout of meetings and also the rollout of Teams and the Teams channels collaboration aspect in sort of different swim lanes. Adding in content migration, realizing that you may need to move content into a team for a group that was a legacy SharePoint, or they had some other type of collaboration repository, Basecamp, file shares even, and what that means to collaboration and what it means to get that content over. And then having change management running all the way through beyond the rollout, and then ending with your meetings cut over from whatever previous solution you used, Skype for Business or whatever, a little further down the line. So this is a part of the deck, and you're welcome to leverage this. I do want to highlight a few other things before I turn it back over to Melissa. So governance, high level and in detail, there are a few core decisions that I like to highlight. So some of these are very obvious and they're in the interface. As you go through the admin interface for Teams, you will get walked through a good number of these pieces. But under Teams creation and management, what is the process for creating a new team? Figuring that out. Will you need a naming convention? Will you need to design something for the integrity of your tenant? Will you use the App Store? Will you turn on the App Store? Is there any vulnerability to that with your organization? Do you turn off the App Store with Office 365? Again, recommended IA, and also what is your recommended approach, and will you be using, and will other workloads within Office 365 be accessible? So a lot of these have dependencies because Teams is an access point essentially for many of the other Office 365 workloads. And with IT operations and security, so your meeting policies, determining these meeting policies and making sure that you are being fair to your users, and that you are enabling as much as you possibly can without exposing vulnerability, conducting your network assessment as recommended by Microsoft. Also acknowledging that there's a very heavy client presence with Teams. And this is kind of a known weakness, if you will, of Teams. And Slack actually just posted an article today about this very topic. So I think it's kind of interesting. And then you get into content retention, archival, Teams archival and abandonment, and then e-discovery. And then with external access, I'll just say really quickly, I've worked with a lot of different organizations that have varying different levels of configuration with their external access. Some have shut it off completely, and that's totally fine. Some have allowed for chat and call federation, but you're not allowed to invite an external user into the team to collaborate. And also some have turned off the ability to collaborate on files through OneDrive and through Teams as well. So there's no right or wrong answer, but it's really there's a number of different settings that you should be aware of. So I actually want to focus a little bit on Teams owners, because a good number of the settings and governance principles really are controlled at the team owner level. And it's really important that you kind of figure out what your stance is on these things, so that there's consistency for the user experience as you roll these pieces out. So being a great team owner, there's now channel moderation feature, which is really awesome, but does not exist on the general channel. So the channel moderation feature is really awesome, and making sure that there's permission management, that teams owners understand how to manage permissions. And then getting into team settings, one of the things that I want to point out, and I was just doing a training for an organization on the East Coast, and it came up, posts and edits, and they were doing a bit of a train the trainer. They're a very large company. They flew in their IT operators from around the country, and they were training them on how to roll out teams in their own business units around the world. And in that training, posts, edits, editing and deleting posts within the conversations came up, and they didn't have a firm stance on it. And your inclination is to turn that off, to not allow users to be able to edit or delete their posts. But there are definitely some ramifications and some user experience issues if you do turn that off. So, I not to say that one way is more right than the other, but I'm just saying that there are a lot of these little settings that can have reverberation in the user experience if you don't have some thought behind what is going to make most sense to your organization and to protect your organization, but continue the flow of use. So I would just, like classification and determining what classification levels you have for your content, for classified, restricted, highly confidential, etc. I think that it's important to consider these types of features. And so there's a lot of information that Microsoft provides around running pilot groups. And so I'm going to breeze through this just so that we can make sure to get to the CardioLog demo. The last thing that I have to share with you all is just a change journey approach. Change management is more than training. And especially with a tool like Teams, that could be a complete paradigm shift in how your users are used to collaborating and what tools they've ever been exposed to. It can be a little bit jarring. It can be a different way of working. That's not to say it's difficult to learn, but it could be a change. And this change journey approach is just providing you some thoughts around, making sure that you're understanding what the gap analysis is in the impact of the change. And that's your iceberg, right? Making sure that you understand what are the users going to be faced with, what is their experience today, and how will introducing Teams alter that or bring something new to the table for them. Mobilizing a force for change, so defining that network and building that network. And oftentimes this is manifested in evangelists and bringing on early adopters. Developing your game plan. So what is your change plan and what's the vision and strategy for how you're going to go about it? And then journeying with the users through the change. So changing communications that this is coming, here's how to use it, here are tools at your disposal, and engaging and measuring it. One of the things I haven't really mentioned in this conversation is value measurement frameworks and understanding what are what's going to be your measure, what's going to determine success and adoption for you. And I think that this is a good segue to transition to Melissa, because she can probably provide you with a lever with which to measure adoption.
Great, thanks so much, Jill.
All right, I'm passing the control back to you, Melissa.
Perfect.
And thank you so much, everybody, for the time and listening.
Yes, thanks. Thanks again to you, Jill, for all that helpful information on really, what we should all be going through when we're making the rollout to Teams. So just want to make sure you can all see my screen here. Okay, we're all set. So like Jill said, I'm just going to jump right into our demo of CardioLog Analytics, go over how analytics can really help you boost adoption for SharePoint as well as Teams. And then I'll move into how internal communications can really help you improve adoption and engagement of Microsoft Teams. So when we're talking about boosting adoption, one of the most important steps is to actually measure the current and past adoption rates. And this helps you to better understand patterns in your users' use of the portal and really define what your goals are for increasing adoption. And as we know, having specific goals during a rollout is really essential in achieving your goals for boosting adoption. So starting off on this visitor adoption overview dashboard, we have a lot of data that really helps us to see those patterns of adoption. And starting with this bar graph here, we can see the number of active users out of your total number of users, which really gives you a good start to see the portion of your users who are active and gives you a better idea of how much support or training you may need to provide. To the right, we can see the average length of visit, which helps us understand how much time people are spending in the portal. And here we can also see the average depth of visit and bounce rate. So we can really see how deep users are going into the portal. And this can be a great insight here. So for example, if there's an average page depth of only 1 page per visit, we know that we may need to make some changes to content. And for creating a roadmap, having those clear goals is really important. So updating existing content can be one of our goals that just a quick glance at analytics has helped us to define. And what's really nice is right now we're seeing an overview with a lot of data. We can also filter this to see just a specific time period, whether that's by quarter or by month. So I'll go ahead and filter for Q1 here, and you can see that the data synced to just show us information from Q1. So we get an even more in-depth understanding of adoption during specific points in time. And now let's get into a little more detail of our active and inactive users. So to the left here, we can see our active versus inactive users split by department. And instead of spending time retraining all of our departments on SharePoint, we can see which departments have the most inactive users and only spend our training budget and time on those specific departments, like R&D and sales, for example here. And if we want to personalize training even more, we can see specifically which users have the most visits, as well as which users have 0 visits. And then we know that these specific users need more training and support. And again, going back to measuring our adoption rates over time, here we can see how activity in the portal has changed over the past 2 years. And hopefully in your environment, you would see an increase here. But it's also helpful to see cases similar to our portal where we have a decrease in activity over time. And now we can go ahead and start investigating what may have caused that decrease in activity in the portal. And we can start going into detail into some other metrics that could have caused this, including search, which we'll go over next. So I mentioned search as a metric that could lead to decreased activity in the portal. And we all know that having a frustrating time searching for things and not being able to find what you're looking for can turn us away from looking for information in the portal. So this is one metric where we can really take action and change people's experiences in the portal. So starting at the left side of the dashboard, here we can see all of the things people are searching for and how successful they are in finding results for those searches. So let's click on the most searched term, benefits. And now we can see how many people are searching for something related to benefits and how often they're finding answers when they're searching for benefits. So we can see the search term benefits has been searched over 1,000 times and by almost 700 users. But what's really interesting here is that we can see the average search result position, which is 10.8. And so what this means is that people are scrolling to the 10th or 11th result to get their answer. And to go even deeper, only about 50% click on one of the results. So this really shows us that people are looking for more information about benefits in the portal, and they aren't getting the results they need. And making sure people have support and guidance to help them understand the portal and how to use it is another very important step in boosting adoption that we'll go over more later. So here would be an opportunity to create another goal, which would be to go through this search results list, and we can see, are any of the results relevant? And if they're not, let's go through and modify the existing content or create new content. And if the 10th or 11th result is helpful, we can also go in here and rearrange the search results list to put that result at the top. And this is just an example of one search term that we can go ahead and optimize to make using the portal a better experience for your users. I also wanted to quickly touch on portal resources because we'll see that another crucial step in improving adoption is to complete the transition over to a new portal. So we can see that here in our demo environment, we're currently transitioning from SharePoint 2013 to SharePoint Online. And we can even see the number of tree items that we still have left to move over to SharePoint Online. And this gives us a clear view of how far along we are in our migration, which also gives us a big hint as to why people may not be adopting the new portal. If a majority of the tree items are still in the old portal, people are going to continue using it rather than adopting the new portal. So really finalizing that migration is an important step to get your users to adopt your new portal. And that was just a quick overview of how analytics can help you define what you need to change to improve adoption within SharePoint. And now I'm going to jump into our new Teams Analytics dashboards to show you how you can boost adoption during your Teams rollout by measuring your users' interaction within Teams. Okay, so starting off here, we can see, okay, sorry guys. So starting off here, we can see all of our current teams, but if we want to see data for a specific team, we can also choose which team we want to report on. So I'll choose management, for example. And then we can see all the data reflected just to show us data on the management team. We can also filter by specific channels within the management team. And we can also see over here our top contributors. And we can sort them by if they're most active from starting a thread, channel messages, replies, or attachments. And on the flip side, this can help us see which users aren't using Teams to its full potential and may need more training and support. And into our next dashboard, here we can see Teams activity. And what's really nice here is that we can see who our top teams are, and we can see how active each of these top teams is to really get a benchmark of what a successful team looks like for you. And we can even go more in depth here and sort this by office and department, so we can get some insights into how different locations and different groups are using Teams and what their top level of activity looks like. And here we have our influential users dashboard. And this really shows us who is using Teams the most. And again, this can be sorted by specific team and then channel. And this is another big tip for boosting adoption, finding out who your influential users are. So you can have a rotating top Teams users on the SharePoint homepage to really recognize and reward those users to encourage them to continue using Teams. And you can also reach out to them and invite them to share some tips or host a quick session explaining some how-tos on using Teams to also motivate and support your inactive users. And moving to our last Teams dashboard here. So right now, everyone is really doing this big rollout to Teams, and we're starting to move away from products like Skype for Business and Slack. And what we really want to track now is the user's productivity within Teams. So I've shown you that we can see messages and interactions, but we also want to make sure that your users aren't just using Teams to chat, but that they're using it productively. And that's what we can see right here. So we can see the number of files shared as well as the number of apps used. So we can see, do users understand the full functionality of Teams and are they using it productively? And if they aren't, this gives us a better understanding of which functions of Teams users need more training on. And now I'll quickly move into CardioLog Engage, and we'll see how better internal communication can also help you to boost engagement during your rollout of Teams. So CardioLog Engage is based on campaigns that you can run within Teams to further engage your end users. So everything here is based on the information captured by CardioLog Analytics. So we have a lot of information about users, like which department they're coming from, which office, as well as their usage habits, what time do they log into the portal, what sites do they visit, and we can use this powerful information to send the message to the right user at the right time. So a few examples of how we can use the tool. So when we're building a campaign, we can first select who the audience of the campaign will be. So we can target everyone in the organization, or we can choose specific groups by things like department, office, country, or what's really nice is that we can choose a specific team to target our message to. So here we can see marketing team or IT, but of course your specific organization's teams would show up here. And we can also base this audience on user behavior. So you might want to target inactive users who haven't interacted with Microsoft Teams ever, or maybe in the last 30 days, as well as targeting engaged users, users that already viewed or responded to a specific campaign. And now we can select the channel. So instead of a typical email, which users are likely to miss in their already crowded inbox, we provide you with a few other options. So you can send them a mobile notification, a text message, which are both really great for those inactive users, or we can send them a message right within Teams. And this message will appear in a separate channel for them, and this is a really useful way to communicate with users. So next, we can choose the text and design of the message, as well as the call to action. So for example, we can show OK or cancel buttons, or we can add RSVP buttons if we're inviting our users to an event. So maybe, are you coming to the HR event? And in this case, we can even create a follow-up campaign. So users who RSVP'd maybe, let's target them and ask if they're able to confirm. Or users that clicked on yes, let's send them an email with more details about the event or a reminder before the event. And finally, you can select the trigger. So you can schedule this to be shown to the user at a specific time, whether it's 8 a.m. your time or 8 a.m. during the user's time, or you can trigger this based on the user's behavior. So for example, if they're performing a search within SharePoint and they're viewing the search results page, we can ask if they found what they're looking for. So we can see here, this is what the campaign would end up looking like. And this is just a short example, but there's a lot that you can do with this tool. And I want to show you another really cool use case. So we're logged into SharePoint here, and let's say we want to look up some information around maternity leave. So I'll type that into the search bar. And we see that no results are found. But here, we can see a pop-up from CardioLog Engage within our SharePoint portal asking, having a hard time finding what you're looking for? Use our search specialist in Teams and tag Ziggy for assistance. So I'll go ahead and click on I need assistance. And we can see that is opening up Teams for us. And now we can see we're in the team search specialist. And we can ask our question and tag Ziggy, who will answer it for us. So I'm going to go ahead and tag Ziggy. And let's ask again about maternity leave. And we can see that Ziggy responds with the link to more information about the employee benefits program. And again, going back to user frustration with search, implementing a CardioLog Engage campaign like this really helps users to find the information that they were looking for without them having to put in any extra effort. And that's just one of the many examples of how CardioLog Engage can make using the SharePoint portal and Teams a more enjoyable experience for your users and improve adoption and engagement. So go back to the presentation really quickly. And I do think we'll have time for a question or two, but I first just wanted to mention our offer for a free one-on-one evaluation session with CardioLog Analytics and Jill. So during this session, we'll be able to go over more about collaboration in Teams, how to boost your SharePoint or Office 365 adoption, how to increase engagement with your intranet, and anything else we've spoken about today that you have any questions on. And again, this is a free evaluation. The only thing you need to do to sign up is to email info@intlock.com after this webinar. So since we still have a few minutes left until the end of our time today, we'll go ahead and take a look at some of the questions. And if you didn't have time to send your questions yet, feel free to type those now in the GoToWebinar panel. Okay, so I think there's a question about CardioLog from Michelle, and she asked, how does the data get into Power BI? So we actually grab the data through JavaScript tracking, and again, through the Azure Active Directory to get all that information. And I believe we have a question here for Jill. Kate asked to please define islands mode.
Islands mode is a setting in when you're configuring Skype for Business and Teams that basically allows the two, because they actually share the same service within Office 365, and it just allows them to operate independently of one another. So it doesn't change anything about your Skype for Business settings, and it allows you to have meetings and to operate chat and identity presence awareness in Teams as well.
Okay, thank you, Jill. Kevin asked, could you share the address to Microsoft's flip chart on Teams?
Sure, yeah. I can share it with you, Melissa, and then you can get it out to our group here.
Okay, perfect. So we'll send that over to you after the webinar, Kevin. I see another question for you, Jill, from Jamie, and she said, is chatting with Skype for Business any different than chatting within Microsoft Teams?
It is. So chatting within Skype for Business leverages the Skype for Business interface, and Teams, it's keeping a separate record of the chat conversations. So actually, if you, your conversation history within, you're going to have two conversation histories essentially. So the conversation history within Outlook is going to be tied with Skype for Business, and there is a Teams chat history that I believe is also, I don't think it's accessible through Outlook, but there is a Teams chat history that's controlled through the Teams admin interface, and as the administrator, you can set the duration of how long you want the history to exist.
Okay, thanks, Jill. I see another question for you from Cindy, and she asked, how long does it take for chat to show up in Teams once you switch a user over to Teams only mode?
So chat can exist. So you can go from islands mode, right? You can exist in islands mode where you are operating both Skype for Business and Teams independently of one another. You can eventually, and so in which case your users can chat with one another in either interface. It's just a preference. And gradually as your users become more familiar with the Teams interface and/or you're ready to make the switch or decommission, then you can decommission Skype and you can make that notification known. But the hope is that your users have been chatting in Teams long enough that they're familiar with the interface and it's a seamless transition.
Okay, great. And I think we have time for one or two more questions. So I see there's also one from Drew asking, based on your experience, Jill, do companies of any size tend to use Teams or a similar product, or do they use their ERP system for business processes?
Oh, I would say that depending on the business process, ERP is still, so we'll put it this way. Teams isn't necessarily a like an intranet type platform or one that you're going to leverage to manage processes. You can, and there are people who are doing it and running some very simple processes through Teams, but it wouldn't be the chosen platform. So depending on what the process is and how complex and or tied it is to your environment, you may, and your line of business, you may leverage your ERP to still manage those types of business processes. With that said, a better candidate when you are leveraging Office 365 for business process would be to focus more so on the SharePoint interface. So, there is a lot of tie-in. Much of Teams is actually running off of SharePoint, but SharePoint from like a presentation perspective just gives you a little bit more of that website-like experience to manage and run processes through.
Okay, great. And I see one more question about CardioLog. They'll just go ahead and answer really quickly. So Rachel asked, how do you set up CardioLog Analytics? And that's a really easy answer. So you actually don't need any servers or databases to set it up. All you need to do is a quick installation of the add-in from AppSource. And this is the same for CardioLog Engage too. So with that, I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up for today. Again, thank you so much, Jill, for walking us through how to create an effective roadmap for your team's rollout. And if anyone is interested in part 2 of the series, where Jill will go over supporting your users after the rollout, you can sign up for part 2 in the email we'll be sending out after this webinar. And again, if you have any colleagues that you think might be interested, feel free to send them the link as well. And also don't forget to email us, info@intlock.com, if you're interested in the one-on-one evaluation session. So thanks again to Jill and to everyone who joined us on the webinar today, and have a great rest of your day.